misinformation is particularly common during crisis moments or rapidly moving events because there's a very clear supply and demand problem for information, especially in these moments where everybody's tuning in, where everybody wants the latest information. That information may be hard to come by, especially verifiable, fact-based information. And so as people are clamoring for more and more information about a region, there is a void of that sort of verifiable content that can be filled very easily by actors who maybe are trying to monetize, by incentive structures that maybe prioritize virality. And all those things, I think, snowball into the fact that misinformation can become a really acute challenge at a time where focusing on verifiable information is particularly important. I think when consumers of information are sort of rapidly seeing this fire hose of content coming out, it's really useful to pause, to just take a beat, recognize that, not all the facts are probably known, especially about things that are quite graphic or quite shocking. And so waiting for more information to come out, I think, is really critical. On the kind of other side of the coin, as this information comes out, doing that research, figuring out where people are based, what is their background, if they purport to be an expert in something, are they actually that expert? Checking out the images that are being shared. Is there a history of an image? You can very easily find if it's a recycled image by doing a reverse Google image search. I think all of that funnels into this idea of just pausing for a second, avoiding that sort of knee-jerk reaction, and continuing to do research in this space a little bit to be able to be smart consumers of this type of information, because it is such a complicated moment for the information space when supply is dwarfed by demand. Often in the past, when journalists were looking for information on the ground about rapidly moving events, where maybe journalists, it was unsafe for them to go or they couldn't physically access a location, they might rely on sort of citizen journalists, people who were already on the ground. The usage of the iPhone became really prominent to record footage in real time of things going on. This was sort of one of the first ways that the Arab Spring really got out to the broader public. One of the ways that they really shared that content widely is through Twitter, or the platform formerly known as Twitter. But this is the first kind of crisis moment that we're seeing where a lot of policy changes at X are really showing how they respond to a kind of rapid deluge of content. And in many respects, they're failing. And so it's become really hard to find that once sort of somewhat verifiable, at least a little bit more curated information. And that's not to say that it was perfect at all, but it was a bit more curated than, people paying for an algorithmic boost to spread viral content that they are then getting paid for that may or may not be true. It may or may not be a video game. It may or may not be a video from, a conflict 5 years ago. And so a lot of these changes, I think, are slowly demonstrating the cracks in a space that was once a really critical source for journalists. And so I think that that's become a real challenge for people who are trying to collect this real-time information, to be able to have that on-the-ground voice. We could talk about the media, especially professionalized journalists, sort of going back to the basics in terms of source vetting. That's really critical to be able to appropriately gauge nuance. We saw recently the New York Times put out an article about some of the challenges around their reporting of the hospital bombing in Gaza. There are a lot of things that could have changed in that context, and these are skills that journalists know. And so I think going back to those basics, really being cautious in terms of sourcing will be critical. For researchers, this is a really difficult time for researchers looking at the online space. Data access is really restrictive. There have been all kinds of attacks on researchers who are exploring this space actively. So I think where possible, thinking about ways to pool resources to be able to get at some of these questions in depth in the way that previously was maybe a bit more possible would be really valuable too. And then I think for the general public, the kind of information consumers, It's very natural to respond to things that are shocking. It's very natural to seek out information that kind of confirms what we already know. But trying to avoid those impulses, I think, will be really important. I know it's maybe a cliche at this point, but especially for things that are shared online, doing your own research is really important in this context. If somebody claims to be a Middle East expert, Google them. What have they done in this space before? Who is citing their work? All of that, I think, is really important. Checking out images, especially images that purport to be from a conflict zone. What is the provenance of those images? Are there telltale signs of it maybe being generated? Is the background blurry? If there are people in it, what do their hands look like? All those things that we kind of use to spot a generated image are really valuable. And then, broader, just looking at where this image is being shared, I think is also really important.